Jonathan Hatch. So Caroline is the CEO of BTC Markets. Jonathan Hatch is a solicitor and senior advisor at ASIC Innovation Hub. I'm going to leave you guys to it because I know that your time is valuable and I'm just going to go. See ya.
Thank you, Amy Rose.
Yes, thank you. And hi, Jonathan. Before I go any further, I just want to call out the efforts of Amy Rose and the team at Blockchain Australia for all that they have done to put this week together. It is monumental and it's gone so smoothly. And I'm just so grateful for all that they do to help our industry put out the best message and best version of itself. So thank you very much. So with that said and done, Jonathan, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know we only have about 15 minutes or thereabouts with you, so I'll keep it brief and to the point. One of the points that you mentioned actually just when we were starting this conversation was that oftentimes it kind of gets lost around the actual function of ASIC and what exactly ASIC is here to do. So I'll probably open with that as the first question. What does ASIC do?
All right. Thank you, Caroline. I will be very quick and just run through it at a high level. I'm mindful of the time for everyone. We do have a 3 o'clock hard finish. So though we've been watching developments from DLT through to AI, I'd love to spend a lot of time discussing AI, but we don't have the time for it today. The focus for us has always been ensuring we meet our mandate around protecting consumers and ensuring there's fair and efficient markets and a few other steps that we are required to carry through. There is a range of ways for people to engage. I would encourage people who do have questions in this space. I can see from some of the chat earlier that people may not fully understand our role. So if you do need to come into ASIC, welcome that as well. And that might be just to understand what our role is as a conduct regulator. We're not creating the law. We're not necessarily able to control everything else in different parts of your business life. But we are welcoming people to engage, and whether that be through traditional full financial service license applications, right through to engaging with the Innovation Hub with myself and my colleagues, where those want to use either the sandbox or just discuss what you're looking to do and how it might fit with the regime, acknowledging, of course, that the regime is going through a bit of a state of review by the government more broadly.
And I think that's probably one of the key points too, as you pointed out, you're a conduct regulator. You're not necessarily there to write the rules. You're there to enforce the rules, without trying to make it sound too negative.
Yeah. Without wanting to sound like a police station.
No, but to your point, it's the conduct regulator. You're not there necessarily to set the diktat that's set by government. So on. So that's an important point to make. The next point I want to talk about is actually a survey that came out, I think, over the course of the last month. It's an international survey about innovation and the different rankings of different countries about where their economy sits. And what really struck me from looking at that article was that, or the research rather, was that Australia ranks 62nd out of 64 of countries around the world for entrepreneurship. And it ranks, I think it's like 58th or something for diversity within its economy. Now, that's a big issue for everybody in Australia. We all have to look to overhaul and improve those numbers. And from our conversation, and I suppose this is a different lens to view ASIC through, is around ASIC's role to support innovation. And obviously that's a key part of your mandate within the organization. Would you like to talk us through a little bit of kind of what ASIC does to support to support innovation in our economy?
I'll run to it at a high level. For those who want to stay a startup or a scale up, and then maybe well underway, but looking to undertake new work which could fall into our jurisdiction, the consideration always is, how do you want to engage? Now, you can, of course, spend a lot of money to get legal advice early on. Often the way I describe our job is more giving you a regulatory nudge so you can understand the regime better. Engaging with ASIC can allow us to try and guide you through the benefit of our senior staff so you can understand what you need to consider. And that might be the step before seeking legal advice, though we do expect you to have a good understanding, which may require legal advice, particularly for larger entities, of what you're doing. And we will engage whether it be academic or business forums, events like this with industry participants, or even things like the Reserve Bank CDBC trials, where we'll try and support the startup community or the existing industry to find their way through the regime. We aren't here to provide deterministic views on the law. That's the role of the court. Okay. We aren't here to tell the government what to do. That is why you have elected officials and why Treasury will give guidance or recommendations to those individuals. But we are here to try and help you at least try and understand what the regime is. That's why we encourage engagement, whether it be through existing connections or through the Innovation Hub. We remain flexible with that. All I would suggest is those engaging with us, try to understand what you're doing up front so you can actually clearly articulate it. And try and remember that though there will always be voices saying people need to know more, understand things differently, I've seen that in today's chats in particular, often there's a lot of work that people don't understand going on in other spaces, or there may be things that you don't immediately see the value of, and regulators may understand a lot more than you think. So just be mindful of trying to provide a sufficient clarity for us to look at the work from the perspective we're coming from, i.e. a conduct regulator, not necessarily every other aspect of the role.
I think from our experience, so I can't remember what year we first applied to ASIC for our AFSL. I do know it was a 17-month process, and we talk about that data point a lot, because I think what it shows really is, to your point, Jonathan, the amount of engagement that a business or an applicant can get through ASIC when going through the AFSL process. And certainly it requires rigor and a lot of kind of careful thought about every nuance of what it is that you're putting forward. So, and there's benefits for that across the business, not just in your application. So that's a really good point. I'm a fan of your LinkedIn posts, Mr. Hatch. I often see the amount of quality content you put out around the international regulatory environment in particular, as well as what's happening locally. I comment on it invariably, but I do lurk on your LinkedIn to have a look and see what's breaking, because it is important to keep that kind of global lens, not just to be solely looking at what we're doing here in Australia, as good and all as it is. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is that global perspective. So what global trends are you seeing either within cryptocurrency or within regulation kind of worldwide that you kind of share with our audience here?
All right. First, I will keep it. My LinkedIn is not an official communication channel.
It is not an official communication. It is a personal use only.
That our regulatory peers are not something I'll directly comment on because they've got their own tasks, but they are doing a lot of work. There is going to be policymakers everywhere, and policy does take time, whether it be in blockchain work or even in AI. There's a lot of stuff you can do up front, and people will say, I can deliver something impressive, and that's great. But the reason the policy exists is not always for the case of delivering something immediately. It's considering risks and problems that we've seen in the past and applying them to new technologies or new paths to apply those technologies. More often than not, you will find a lot of things that we see are actually things we've seen in the past, perhaps in different forms, but they are things we've seen. So policymakers are looking at the international coordination still. There is work from IOSCO. There is work from FATF as of yesterday with the updates. So we've got work at the EU level more broadly. IOSCO, as I mentioned, as well as I think the FSB is coordinating work on behalf of the G20. And even Dr. Jane Thompson mentions, apologies, some work at the Commonwealth level to try and have some recommendations across certain spaces around this work. What I'd encourage people to think about is part of the thing that takes time, and citing the counter to Caroline's earlier positioning of ASIC, Australia in the entrepreneurship scale, is I think we were third in the RegTech space a few years ago in Boston Consulting. And the reason is often we have different regimes that fit well with technology, but they are principle-based, and other countries will have to adapt each thing. Just like some people copy Australia, we will look at other regulatory regimes as well. FATF is a good example where we all try and meet certain outstanding outcomes, but we'll have to adapt them to our jurisdictional nuances.
I mean, certainly for me, and I'm not a regulator, I have no qualifications whatsoever on this subject. I'm an innocent bystander, but certainly from reading the materials that we get out from FATF, from the FSB, from IOSCO, there's kind of large multinational organizations, if I can pronounce that word properly. What I'm reading and seeing, certainly there are consistencies in the themes of what they're putting out. I think that for any of us who are in the industry, if you're reading those papers long enough, you soon pick it up. It reminds me of when I was doing my Leaving Cert back in Ireland, and I sat enough of the geography preparatory questions, I could answer the exams when they came around. So it's probably good, as you say, good steer there to read those documents as they come through. I suppose the burning question for me sitting here as the CEO of a cryptocurrency exchange is, will ASIC license crypto asset businesses here? What's the time frame, or what's the thinking on that?
That will ultimately depend on the powers we are given. There are already entities in this space, I believe, who are licensed to undertake certain activities, even issuing certain things in the crypto or DLT space. The important factor here for those seeking licenses or arguing that they do not need one is the need to be able to articulate what they're doing in the context of financial services law when engaging with ASIC. Part of the Innovation Hub is there to help people work through it, but also seeking good advice, whether it be lawyers, consultants, or licensing experts. The challenge comes down to fundamentally, is the conduct you're looking to be licensed for something that's within ASIC's jurisdiction? I mean, technically someone could be doing something in DLT that's in another regulated space, say provenance, food, something else where there may be different licensing obligations. But for the purposes of crypto, it will come down to the conduct and whether you meet the requirements. And of course, if Treasury puts up recommendations and they pass through the Parliament, there may be additional licensing things, but that is a matter for the wisdom of the Parliament to determine in due course.
Yeah, fair enough. And again, obviously something that for us is on the other side of the fence within blockchain and crypto, it certainly is a topic that we've been engaging with quite frequently with government, both successive governments that we've seen in the last couple of years. And hopefully we'll see something more coming out by the end of next month, just to get us started on that. There's been a lot of conversations around the impact of cryptocurrency with regards to consumers, and it's a hot topic, quite rightly. And that leads me on to my question around what message does ASIC have for consumers in particular, say around crypto or any other points that you want to raise?
That's an important one for us. We've always recognized this potential for responsible innovation, but as given our role in society, we need to balance innovation with the market integrity, consumer protection outcomes, and as I mentioned, work within our mandate. Yeah. ASIC has supported innovations, the Innovation Hub function and other engagement, as well as the government's regulatory sandbox, as well as engagement through things like our Digital Finance Advisory Panel, regulator meetups, participating in industry-led events, and of course, academic forums, even things like meetups where we've attended or I've attended certain things in the past. But we do need to be mindful that not all of crypto is always going to be regulated by ASIC. Not everything that we deal with is going to be within our jurisdiction, at least as it stands at this point. And we've always wanted to remind people that crypto assets, though they have some significant benefits in some contexts, can have extremely highly risky, inherently volatile and complex natures. This means that like any other investment, you need to be prepared to lose what you're putting in, and you need to seek proper advice, diversify, and everything else that you would normally do when dealing with an investment, because there's a high risk of scams in our society right now. There's a lot of commentary. People are acting on this, but it's something you need to protect yourself on. Scams involving crypto are increasingly becoming more and more sophisticated. As someone who does a lot of work in AI, there's a lot of conversations around AI impacting this, how they traditionally badly formatted, badly grammatically set out scams are suddenly less badly grammatically set out, less badly set out generally, and may even have more technical detail that sounds reasonable. In fact, I deleted 2 emails to some of my university accounts this morning that actually looked quite credible phishing emails. Wow. So it is a normal risk we have to deal with. I just encourage people in saying all of this, that we also encourage that be mindful that your money is something you want to protect, your investments and the time you put into this, researching it and looking into proper forums. You need to work through how that may work, seek advice when you need to as consumers, and understand that there are risks. Even suspicious actors in the space, which we always would encourage you to highlight to ASIC, may or may not be bad actors, but if they are, then it may be a risk to you if you are engaging with them as a consumer. Or, and so this is a reminder, for a lot of businesses coming into the space, you are potentially at risk of people going after your assets as well. So to be mindful of that when you want to come into this space, because if nothing else, it's going to hold you back as a business if you're losing money through scams rather than traditional costs that businesses would incur.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair point for us as a business. Actually, just before we come on this call, I was sent out another tweet. We've put together a compliance conversation is what we've called the document, where we give it a snapshot of all our different legitimate channels, and then we go through and kind of document all the different points that we've done around compliance so that people can get a sense of security or just understand what are the secure methods are getting in that B2C markets are going to engage with people. We've seen enough dodgy scams impersonating us, different types of website addresses or like using a number instead of a letter, this kind of nonsense. But unfortunately, they look so good and, as you say, so sophisticated that people quite naturally, that's the point. And I think that's the reoccurring theme with scams as we talk about it, is the sophistication, and for people not to feel as though it says anything about them as an individual if they get caught by scams. That's their point. that's their whole purpose and job. But even for me, there's been some people impersonating me on social media and different social channels, and myself and my family find it very amusing to look at these fake Facebook profiles of me living a life that I could only dream of. But with that, then I suppose one of the last questions before we move on, I know you got to go, is what can the industry do to help? I know you said we've got to be better prepared for ourselves as a business, but what else can we do, or are there other things that we can do to help?
What I would encourage businesses to do is try and be acting best practice themselves to try and ensure that whatever, let's say a licensing regime does come in tomorrow, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but let's say it was, that you can be ready to adapt to it, but also make sure you're protecting the consumers engaging in the space. Mindful of scams, as I mentioned, like just for those who weren't aware, Karen and I were sitting next to each other at a debanking event yesterday. I got a call from someone indicating they were BTC markets to my personal phone. And I was like, interesting irony. It does happen. Now, unfortunately, there's no number, so there's nothing we can do. But it's one of those challenges that does come in. Businesses need to be ready to deal with that at times. And just try and make sure that, remember that not everyone has the same understanding you do. There are a lot of consumers who may be very technically strong in one area, but may not understand the consequences. And I've seen that in some spaces where people have spoken in this space going, well, we're going to do something that's high leverage. There's a reason that high leverage can get high returns, because it's incredibly high risk.
Yeah.
And there's a risk premium built in you don't seem to fully understand in some cases. So businesses need to think about those sort of things, look at what best practices are here and overseas. And if there are problems, raise them to the regulators, because you want to remove the bad actors from the space.
Yeah, and I think too that's incredibly sound advice. I think too that there is an impetus amongst the crypto businesses in Australia, or not all of them. I can't speak for all of them, but certainly from the ones that we've engaged with, to, as you say, mitigate a lot of these factors that we're seeing around this kind of nefarious activity. Obviously, the terrible impacts on the victims, but also for the wider industry, and kind of lumps us all into the same dreadful pot, which is awful. We've got a minute. What else excites you in the space, Mr. Hatch, before we've got to run for your flight?
This is a quick thing I'll simply say is we always welcome people to engage with us. Always try and stick to time. This is what can happen if it doesn't, through no fault of anyone. But just be mindful that we aren't always going to be fully informed on everything, but we do know more than you think in many cases. Be mindful of dealing with government generally, because we are quite well informed, and people will often argue that we don't know what's going on when we do, and we just may not be telling you what you want to hear because we may not agree. So just be mindful of working through what you're doing when you're engaging with us. Strongly encourage you to engage, but come with an open mind so we can have open discussions about what you want to do, and perhaps we can help you find paths that help improve the industry and protect consumers in doing so.
Brilliant. On that very good note then, Mr. Hatch, we shall send you off to the airport, and thank you so very, very much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Caroline. Always good to see Caroline and Jonathan. Moving forward, and we're going to hone in a little bit further on that regulatory lens and gather. We've got 2 roundtables scheduled